Good day, everyone, and welcome to Founders Tech interview, where we interview African founders that have been doing remarkably well. Today, we have Carel Van Wyk with us, and Carel is the founder of MoneyBadger. MoneyBadger is actually a very amazing platform, actually. So Carel is going to be telling us so many things about MoneyBadger. He's going to be talking to us about new regulations in South Africa. We're just going to be hearing from Carel today. How are you doing, Carel?
Hello, Mr. Orange. I'm doing great. Can't complain too much.
Yeah, thank you. So, Carel, basically we want to know what's your background journey like, how you go into the ecosystem. Let's hear from you.
So maybe to start off, you mentioned MoneyBadger. MoneyBadger is a company. It's a service provider that bridges the Lightning Network to retail merchants. It means that if you want to live your life on a Bitcoin standard, MoneyBadger's mission is to make that a reality. We want to enable you to use Bitcoin to pay for day-to-day goods and services, pay your rent, pay for electricity, pay for airtime, pay for food. My background, I am an electronic engineer. I studied electronic engineering in Stellenbosch near Cape Town, South Africa. I've always preferred to start new things, start new projects, which naturally led me to entrepreneurship. And I guess which brings me to a show called The Founders Deck, sort of exposure introduction to Bitcoin. I think it started long ago, long before Bitcoin even existed. As a South African, somebody living in African nation, we deal with a different reality when it comes to our money. It's not the same as people in the West. In particular, our money is more restricted, and our ability to engage in voluntary commerce is also restricted, specifically with things like exchange controls, higher rates of inflation, and in other neighboring countries' cases, forex manipulation, things like that. So I guess growing up as an entrepreneur and a technologist, I thought a lot about how I'm connected to the globe system. And fundamentally, I think I've always thought that we should have a neutral form of money that is native to the internet. This is something that I've been researching for a long time, even before Bitcoin. And I know that sometimes we have internet connectivity issues, another thing we deal with here in Africa. So basically, I've been searching for Bitcoin for a large part of my life after graduating high school. And then one day, Bitcoin found me. It's not like I found Bitcoin. I frequented internet forums like Reddit. And some people were talking about this thing called Bitcoin. And having done a lot of research on e-money, non-government currencies before, my immediate and natural instinct was to say that this is nonsense. It can't exist. I mean, so many people have tried in the past to create something like this. But I read the white paper and I realized that by educating myself and changing my mind a little bit, it all made sense. And then suddenly Bitcoin made sense to me, and I realized that this thing that I've been looking for a very long time has come to me. And that started my journey with Bitcoin and as a Bitcoin founder.
Thank you, Carel. That was beautiful. So basically, you said you love to bring things to life. So I think that would be talking about you co-founding Luno also, because you're also a co-founder for Luno. That was way before MoneyBadger. So you now got into the Bitcoin ecosystem, and we know that MoneyBadger so far has been doing so many beautiful things, onboarding different retail stores to start accepting Bitcoin, and with the new pick and pay shops. So can you tell us some of those success stories, because we want to know how that's been going, onboarding so many shops?
The key I think was picking a good strategy. The naive approach would be saying, let's all go out there and go orange pill merchants. We install a Bitcoin wallet for them, and then we can spend Bitcoin everywhere. And I think in reality, what happened is that a lot of Bitcoiners did go out there and do this, but they then within a few weeks, the merchant would forget about the Bitcoin because nobody would go there to spend it. Fundamentally, Bitcoin is something that most Bitcoiners actually don't want to spend if they have fiat. And we can talk about that because what we're seeing, and the question I get a lot is, who's actually spending their Bitcoin? And the answer is actually very simple. It's people who don't have fiat, or they've got very little fiat. So what they have to spend is Bitcoin, either because they earn Bitcoin, this is the salaries in Bitcoin, or because they've converted a significant portion of their savings to Bitcoin, or they bought a lot of Bitcoin long ago, and subsequently that stash has grown to become the major part of their savings. So despite that, most Bitcoiners will never ever spend any of their Bitcoin. And so this poses a problem if you take a naive approach with merchant onboarding. So what we've done instead is we identified a single sort of cornerstone merchant, which was a large corporate retailer, Pick n Pay. And I'm sure all South Africans, every single South African is very familiar with Pick n Pay. And I don't think we've got enough time to go into the reasons for why they decided to add Bitcoin payments at their points of sale. But the fact of the matter is they did so. And it's now possible to spend Lightning at Pick n Pay anywhere in South Africa. And what that's done is it shifted the narrative. Because in the past, the narrative was Bitcoin is an investment. It's not money. It's not a medium of exchange. But after enabling Bitcoin payments at Pick n Pay, people started to see that there are some Bitcoiners that are spending. There are some Bitcoiners spending their Bitcoin as money. And it started to change the narrative. So what we've done successfully was to demonstrate that there exists a market that is untapped, an untapped market. This is a market of people with Bitcoin balances they want to spend, but they can't spend it because it's not linked to the market. And so our strategy has been let's link the markets, let's bridge these markets, and the pitch to other retailers and to their existing payment providers is to say there's a market of Bitcoin spenders, and you could effectively get exclusive access to that market if you move fast and you're a first adopter. And then another big part of the strategy there was to say, we understand that as a merchant is a risk averse entity. So they might be happy that we bring them a new market, but they will have concerns around the volatility risk and the price of Bitcoin moving. So our promise to them is to say, we will take the risk, we will manage the volatility, you will not be exposed to that. And in fact, you may choose to be settled in your local fiat, which means that you'll get exact pricing and exact payment for all of your goods. And so we distinguish between Bitcoin acceptance and Bitcoin settlement. We enable Bitcoin acceptance, and we do so typically via our partners that are payment providers. And when a merchant comes to us and says, please, can you settle us in Bitcoin? Typically, then we'll refer them to a more self-custodial or direct solution, like just encouraging them to install their own Bitcoin wallet that they can then use to accept Bitcoin payments directly instead of going via our system. So the value I think that our system contributes is that it brings a new market to the merchant, which incentivizes them to enable the option. We make it very easy by integrating with their existing payment provider. It's a click of a switch or click of a button. It's not a big onboarding process. We guarantee an exact fiat amount that will be settled. So there's no risk on the volatility. So it's a very easy decision for the merchant. And because we've made that decision so easy, I think that's why we've succeeded in onboarding several payment provider partners. Yeah, and that gives us access to a very wide merchant network. Like tens of thousands of merchants.
Yeah, it's a whole revolution. So we can see that Lightning is actually changing everyday commerce, not just in South Africa, but across Africa. We can give like some kudos to circular economies doing so many spending, because like you mentioned, it's actually true. Most Bitcoiners do not want to spend; they want to hold, because we keep seeing Bitcoin as a store of value. We all see Bitcoin as this huge store of value. Oh, Bitcoin is the future of money. It's going to change the world. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. Which is true. Which is actually true. Also, we should understand that from the white paper, Bitcoin was supposed to also go round. It's supposed to be everybody's money. So at the end of the day, it's supposed to be spent. So I think this is the breach between companies like MoneyBadger and Bitcoiners here. We try to explain that, come on, we gotta spend. If we want adoption, we have to spend. So in order to spend, the adoption rate has to be quite high. People need to understand what Bitcoin means. People need to adopt Bitcoin. South Africans need to know what Bitcoin is. And speaking of South Africans knowing what Bitcoin is, we saw the new South African laws on regulation of self custody and of course digital assets. So basically, how do you think companies like MoneyBadger, how can they also navigate regulation while preserving the core principles of Bitcoin? And of course, also the users too. Let's look at the two sides, from the company side and from the user side. How can they navigate regulation?
So I think you started open the question with is Bitcoin a medium of exchange? And the rational thing to do is to hold your Bitcoin, to treat it as a store of value only. Because if you expect the price to go up, you should spend something else which price doesn't go up, or maybe even goes down, like fiat, or the value goes down.
Yeah.
So rationally, I think spending Bitcoin maybe doesn't make as much sense. But there's also a risk if you don't spend it. And this is the part that people don't understand. What is that risk? Now, the risk was theoretical for a while, for a long time. And I'll explain is that the risk in not spending Bitcoin is that you shape the views of the system, of society, of the industry, and of government around a single use case. You shape the general view that Bitcoin is only a store of value. And what that means is that the system and government and industry will respond to Bitcoin on that basis. What we've done as a matter of urgency is to prove and to demonstrate that Bitcoin can and is being used as money. And so to your question on the regulations, the new regulations coming and how we can navigate that, not only can we navigate it, but we can potentially influence it, because now we've got strong data to back this notion that Bitcoin is being used as money. And so now that must be considered. It must be considered by industry. It must be considered by government. So what are these regulations that we're talking about? The regulations are new exchange control regulations. There's a window for public commentary, but essentially it replaces South Africa's existing exchange control regulations. And the unfortunate thing with them is that apart from addressing cross-border crypto flows, which is what we were promised, it starts to impose certain limitations on self-custody and peer-to-peer usage, and it introduces new penalties that might apply to Bitcoiners. And so that's a big problem.
Okay, so let's just talk about the regulations, the new self-custody regulations in South Africa, and how do you think organizations now can navigate through these regulations, and how do you also think users can navigate through them?
Yeah, so the regulations they're not called self-custody regulations, and the intent wasn't to regulate self-custody per se. It's a consequence of what they call a gap in cross-border flow regulation. So the idea is to address cross-border flows. This is the part of our central bank that tries to keep tabs on cross-border flows, and they try to ensure that there's not too much capital flowing out of the country. But what they've realized is that Bitcoin, firstly, wasn't a part of those capital flow rules. And secondly, that even if they make some rules that include Bitcoin, then Bitcoin self-custody is still a problem for them because they can't control it, and it's difficult for them to monitor. So what they've done is they've introduced these draft regulations that restrict self-custody and peer-to-peer commerce to some degree. There's some rules that would force you to give up your private keys and passwords if they deemed that there's some reasonable suspicion that you committed an offense. There's punishment like high fines and even up to 5 years in prison. And then there's some funny things. Yeah, there's some funny things in there, like they want you to if you acquire Bitcoin, they want you to declare the purpose of that Bitcoin. So in other words, it's an investment, or it was a mining proceeds that you intend to sell, or it's trading income, whatever. Basically, they want to silo Bitcoin into specific buckets. And if you want to use your Bitcoin for something else, like payments or sending money to your friends and family, well, then you're not allowed to do so. You would first need to dispose of the Bitcoin, sell it for fiat, and then you can buy new Bitcoin that you can then classify differently. So I don't want to go into all the specifics, but basically there's some very concerning rules that they've come out with to sort of address this gap because of self-custody Bitcoin that sits outside of the control framework. And so they just want to make a bunch of things either very difficult or even illegal. For maybe the second part of your question was how do organizations navigate this? Well, right now the appropriate way to respond is directly. There's a public commentary period. So I think if you want to educate yourself, there's a very nice website that South African Bitcoiners have put together. It's called propertyrightsdefense.org. propertyrightsdefense.org. And there's a lot of information there. And there's also some templates that you can use to respond to these regulations, because right now what we need to do is we need to show how these regulations or these proposed regulations don't make sense and how it will have a negative impact on society and on Bitcoiners specifically and on businesses. So this is the way that we should navigate it now. Nothing has been finalized. Once it has been finalized, then we will need to look at what's been put out there, and then we'll have to respond according to that. But for now, I think the appropriate thing is to talk about this, spread the message so that people understand this is happening in South Africa, because it could happen anywhere. Maybe other countries look at what we're doing and they think it's a good idea and they try to replicate it. And also, I think this will be challenged, not only by challenging it in written submissions or commentary, potentially even legally. So the same property rights defense group is, they're asking for donations to set up a legal fund so that they can engage with professional lawyers that can give opinions on the constitutionality of these proposed regulations and where they may be attacked on a legal basis.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. So basically, we as a company just need to put out your own memo, because we saw there were so many responses to the new regulations. Some exchanges actually put out their memo, and that's very good to challenge it while it's still early. And for users, I think it's only best that users, do the same. If you can jump on funding some of these organizations like the property rights, you just jump on that, and that's good. So far so good. Let's track back a little bit to MoneyBadger. We love talking about MoneyBadger here, because MoneyBadger has been out there, doing so much. I think we just onboarded, a coffee store, and that was beautiful to see. So you want to get coffee, and you just come and you scan and you pay for your coffee. So that's Bitcoin in everyday life, literally. And then we saw the travel agency, and that's actually a very good plan, because you know what AirBTC is doing? AirBTC basically tries to help you book. Everything travels down to where you load. So it's also good if it was not originally a Bitcoin organization, but this is a traditional finance organization, but you've been able to make sure that they have integrated Bitcoin payments into their payment platform. And that if that's not real world adoption, I don't know what that is. But in all of these, I'm sure there are challenges and there are some lessons. So far, so good. What are some of those challenges that you have navigated, technically, regulatory, market barriers? Can you share some of them with us?
Technical challenges, not really the blocker. Technically, we're dealing with some really great open source technology to begin with. And then on top of that, we've got purpose-built payments protocols like Lightning. So from a technical standpoint, we've got a very solid base. That's not the problem. Then secondly, regulatory. So far, our use case has fallen somehow in a very favorable spot with regards to the existing regulation. So, for example, we don't custody user funds. And so a lot of the regulations around safekeeping of customer funds over long periods of time doesn't apply to us. I think maybe because we've got this limited scope, which is processing a payment for goods and services within a very short period of time. That makes our jobs regulatory wise a little bit easier. So regulations aren't the blocker. The biggest blocker has been building market, let's call it market demand side from consumers to spend Bitcoin. Like I said at the start, this is the biggest challenge for us because most Bitcoiners don't want to and never will spend any Bitcoin. And so if we're building a business, the business's main concern is to generate revenue because you need to pay staff, because humans need to eat, right? And they need shelter. So because we've got a team, we need to pay salaries. Because we need to pay salaries, we need revenue. And generating revenue is very hard when the market is constrained. Now the market's been growing and we can see adoption growing. That's great. Yeah. But that's the biggest struggle.
It is. You said adoption growing it's like the biggest struggle. Okay, that's pretty interesting. So looking at the future of Bitcoin in Africa, let's take South Africa as a case study. Where do you see Bitcoin adoption going in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? And what role would MoneyBadger be playing in that future?
That's quite a hard question. So on the easy part to answer is that we can see growing adoption month on month. We can see it in the volume of payments that we process, and we can see a consistent growth. So it's not like there's some anomaly with 1 month there's a spike and then the next month there's a dip. We see consistent growth in Lightning payments. So that's great, but it's organic. So it's not like 10x. If you're building these Silicon Valley tech companies, you need 10, 100,000x growth, where we're seeing like 2 to 3x growth. So there's organic adoption. This we can see in the data, and that's very encouraging. Like you said, shout out to the circular economy projects. They're probably the ones driving that. Then with these types of regulations and discussions, on the one hand, it could be bad because it could limit Bitcoin adoption. On the other hand, it could be very good because it is galvanizing the Bitcoiner community. It's introducing new energy into the community and encouraging greater participation and coordination. So it's strengthening the community. There's a risk and a threat, and then the community is responding to that by organizing. So that's good. And then also we don't know, in Nigeria, the central bank disallowed banking institutions to onboard crypto companies, right? So for example, Luna launched in Nigeria, and it was fairly successful. And then one day they basically lost access to their bank account, which obviously made their clients very unhappy. But it wasn't Luna's fault because the central bank simply said the bank is no longer allowed to serve Luna. And then what happened in Nigeria is that a very strong peer-to-peer economy emerged. So for grassroots adoption, maybe that wasn't the worst thing to happen. Maybe it actually strengthened the grassroots movement. So it's kind of hard to say what adoption looks like in the next 5 years. I think a lot depends on the final form that these regulations take. It won't stop adoption. It could strengthen adoption, but it could also hinder it. So, tough question.
I think we're gonna wait and we're gonna see. I think we're just going to wait and see. So let's circle back to the role MoneyBadger is gonna play in this growing adoption in Africa. What role would MoneyBadger play? What do you think?
The main role that we play, like I said, is to demonstrate the real world use of Bitcoin as money. That is the most important thing. It is to demonstrate it, to show the data, to show that it's not some fantasy that is being done on a daily basis. People are buying their coffees, like you said, with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So we're trying to demonstrate this. We're trying to, like I said, change the narrative from Bitcoin as only a store of value to Bitcoin as money, which is both a store of value and a medium of exchange, and hopefully some other things as well, like unit of account, etc. How do we do this? We do this by making it possible to spend Bitcoin at as many places as possible. That's the reason why we onboard merchants. We don't onboard merchants for any other reason than to make it possible to spend Bitcoin as money, which then demonstrates that it is money. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Carel. This is actually a very interesting part because this has to do with the real world adoption now. So when you onboard these retail stores, when you onboard these merchants, these merchants are now the ones who would in turn onboard their users, apart from the fact that their stores are on the map so that Bitcoiners can find these stores. But I think their users who do not really know about Bitcoin can come to the store and they tell them, oh, do you know that you could, pay with Bitcoin too? Make that as an option too. So at the end of the day, that ripple effect is there. And I think that's what's going to grow the adoption rates also.
That's a good point. So I think maybe something to note is that the store owner might know that they accept Bitcoin, but the cashier or the staff might not know this. We've made it so seamless and streamlined. Yeah, that the cashier in many cases don't even know that it's Bitcoin that you're paying with. This is a bit of a problem, but it also represents an opportunity. If you think like, how strong is the orange billing message? If you go to a store that's never heard of it and they don't accept it, and you say you need to accept Bitcoin, that's one thing. But what if you can go into that store and say, did you know that you're already accepting Bitcoin? And here's how it works, and let me show you. And now the next person that comes in here, like you said, to your point, you can tell them that we accept Bitcoin and show them. But this is not MoneyBadger. I don't think this is MoneyBadger's responsibility. We're just too small. We don't have that kind of reach to go into every single shop and store. So that's where we rely on the community. That's where the grassroots communities come in. We empower.
Yeah, I get that. I get that for you. So moving forward, I think with all these things that you do, we would love to know, how do you manage building leadership and also a personal life? How is that?
Yeah, it's hard because what I'm building is so close to my own personal beliefs that it's so deeply ingrained in my identity that it's kind of like the balance between the two is maybe not that good, because it's all I kind of think about, or much of my brain power is spent thinking about this, either as somebody that's building the business or as somebody that believes in Bitcoin as a concept and as a philosophical ideal. So I wouldn't say that maybe I'm the most balanced person. How do we manage building and leadership? I'm also not the typical leader. I'm not the person standing in front of a room full of people telling them what to do and saying I know what's the next thing. I tend to be more of a philosopher, I think. So I need people around me that are more practical and are more business orientated, and luckily I have those. So I trust them and I rely on them, and we have very long, and I'm sure for them, very annoying conversations sometimes, because I try to align philosophy with pragmatism. And I guess that's my style of leadership. I'm not saying it's good style, but I try to surround myself with very, very intelligent, pragmatic people. And then I think what we end up with is relatively good decision making.
Yeah. Thank you, Carel. Okay. We're learning some new things about you, Carel. So let's learn another new thing about you. What is one fact about you that nobody knows? Maybe do you fish? Do you swim? Just tell us something that nobody knows about you.
I've said in previous interviews, my hobby is mountain biking or mountain cycling. I like to cycle up very slowly and then ride down very fast, as fast as I can. That's like a good way to manage a regular dose of adrenaline, which I think we all need. But that's not new. Maybe something new. MoneyBadger is actually my 5th company. Before MoneyBadger, obviously, there was Luno. Before Luno, there was a company called Switchless, which is kind of the precursor to Luno. It was a company that we built a wallet for Standard Bank. A Bitcoin wallet for Standard Bank. This is fully integrated Bitcoin Standard Bank wallet, but it was only reached proof of concept stage. It was never launched. So that's 3 back. Then one before that was a mobile gaming company. I built some games on Mixit, which no longer exists. Nobody knows what Mixit is these days. And before that, I had a little student side hustle selling computer equipment. So I've always preferred to start my own little thing and try to run my own business.
Yeah, I've always been around entrepreneurship. So with all this wealth of knowledge and experience, what is that one advice that you give to founders building Bitcoin companies in Africa today?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. What I usually say if somebody asks me this question is just don't do it. Just don't do it. Because
don't do it.
Just don't. No, because because Bitcoin, the reason we get to Bitcoin is not for commercial reasons. We get to Bitcoin for very idealistic and philosophical reasons, and hopeful reasons. So what ends up happening is that if you're a founder and you try to build a Bitcoin business, you quickly run into the reality of the market. And the market is limited. And especially in Africa, the market is small. So now you're building a Bitcoin business, like take MoneyBadger, for example. We're building it for Bitcoiners. That is a small section of the market. We're building it for Bitcoiners who spend Bitcoin. That is an even smaller portion of the market. So you quickly run into that reality, and then you start to realize that you have a conflict. You have a conflict between your heart and your mind, where your heart is telling you that you need to keep fighting for Bitcoin, and your mind is telling you that this is not sustainable in terms of revenues. And so then you end up in a perpetual cycle of pain. But if you have to found a Bitcoin business in Africa, and you maybe find a little niche where you can make it work for yourself, I would say don't do it alone, because there are other people that have walked the path and they've got experience, and you'll save yourself a hell of a lot of time if you engage with them, so you can ask them specific questions. And then just maybe more general advice, get a good co-founder if you can. Like, a good co-founder is the most valuable thing that you can have. And it is, I think, factually, based on statistically, it is the most strongest indicator of success, ultimate success, is whether you have a good co-founder or not.
Thank you, Carel. And when we look at Bitcoin, we always think long term, So when we look at a Bitcoin product, we always think, long term too. So what do you think is the mindset that's required to build long term in Bitcoin?
You need to think about the butterfly flapping its wings, because long term is misunderstood. Some people think long term is 5 years. When we're talking about Bitcoin, people need to understand that long term is centuries. It's hundreds of years. It will, the impact of the actions that we take today will ripple over the next half a millennia, or maybe if we still survive that long, hopefully. The view that I take is, if you're into archaeology and you go excavate an ancient city, typically what you find is there's multiple layers. There's actually multiple cities that get built on top of each other over centuries. And so the Bitcoiner mindset is that we want to come in and we want to replace the existing system with Bitcoin. But that's never going to happen. That's not how things advance. Things advance through survival. The status quo needs to fall away before Bitcoin can rise, because it will always get suppressed by the status quo. But the reality and the truth is that the status quo never lasts. That is always changing. What doesn't change?
Yeah.
Well, the Bitcoin code doesn't. I guess the code changes, but the Bitcoin consensus rules very rarely changes. So I think if we take that view, then first, many cities need to collapse before we ultimately build a city on Bitcoin. So I'm taking a multi-100-year view on this. And that's why I think the actions that we take matter so much today, because it has a huge impact that compounds over time.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have you on the show, and we look forward to having you next time. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio today. And it's a wrap for today with the CEO, the founder of MoneyBadger, Carel Van Wyk. Thank you so much, Carel, and have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Orange.